We've said it several times here on Mark Rogers TV. The Big Ten showing in 2012 in non-conference competition, the worst in league history. Count them, two wins against top 25 non-conference competition. That was Michigan State over Boise State at home in September. That was also Northwestern defeating Vanderbilt 23-13. The Commodores, not rated at the time of kickoff, finished in the final top 25 after going 9-4 in the SEC. So the Big Ten trying to enhance that reputation nationally in the non-conference slate coming up this fall. We've rated the SEC. We've looked at the SEC and the non-conference games coming up, the huge games in the SEC. We do the same in the Big Ten, and we're going to run down all 6 BCS conferences. The non-conference games, most of those in September. But here's one for you as we start at Wisconsin. A November 9th game against BYU. The Big Ten, Commissioner Jim Delaney has stated that they want to play more important non-conference games overall, but also later in the season. Bucking tradition in the Big Ten, where the conference has always played the 3 or 4 non-conference games, and then all the conference games, they're going to mix them in late in the season. Here's an example of that. BYU at Wisconsin. The Badgers, of course, won the Big Ten championship game last year. They've got a new head coach in Gary Anderson. He comes in where he did a phenomenal job at Utah State, going 11-2 this past season, winning a bowl game. He's got 5 quarterbacks in camp. They're all competing for the job. We broke it down in our Wisconsin spring football post. But most notably, you've got Danny O'Brien, the ACC Freshman of the Year, transferred to Wisconsin, disappointed the first couple games of the season, lost his job after the loss to Oregon State on the West Coast. Joel Stave came in. He played extremely well as a freshman, but he got injured against Michigan State. So you bring in Kurt Phillips, and what a feel-good story this guy is. Kurt Phillips had 2 major knee injuries and surgeries in his college career, was a top recruited player out of Tennessee, but he finally made it on the field as a senior and led Wisconsin to the Big Ten championship game. He will get a shot as a 6th-year redshirt, Kurt Phillips as well. Then you've got Tanner McAvoy, Gary Anderson's a prized recruit, a guy that can move in the pocket. He's very mobile, can run it, and that's what Gary Anderson likes. He likes dual-threat quarterbacks, but he's the dark horse as a freshman. But he could see some playing time elsewhere in the Wisconsin offense as the Badgers need to find some playmakers other than Jared Abbrederis. For BYU, the last time we saw the Cougars, they came back to defeat San Diego State in the Poinsettia Bowl, and the guy that made it happen was all over the field. Very impressive. Defensive end Kyle Van Ooyen. Van Ooyen made plays in the end zone, speed rush off the end, stripped the football, forced fumbles, scored points on defense as BYU came back to win that football game. So very interesting here. BYU and Wisconsin at Camp Randall should be a very tough game for the Badgers there on November 9th. On September 4th, you've got Ohio State taking on Cal. The Buckeyes, the best team in the Big Ten in 2012 at 12-0, 8-0 in conference, but had a very difficult time holding off Cal, a game that was 28-all in the fourth quarter before Cal had a breakdown in the secondary, and Braxton Miller went up top, 35-28 for the Buckeyes there. So this is a team that's supposed to make a BCS run, but the front seven's been decimated. They're very young, yes, very talented. Of course, Urban Meyer's brought in elite recruits, but Adolphus Washington, look for him to make a difference at defensive end. He's going to have to. Again, the front seven's been decimated with a ton of big-time losses. Bradley Roby, one of the best cover corners in college football for the Buckeyes. Okay, Sonny Dykes takes over for Jeff Tedford at Cal. The Golden Bears, only 3-9 last season, but again, gave the Buckeyes all they could handle. New quarterback, new top running back, new wide receiver. The number 1 guy is Keenan Allen leaves, so Cal's got all sorts of issues on offense. And of course, but though they gave the Buckeyes all they could handle last season, and they're hosting Ohio State this season on September 14th. On week 1, the opening Saturday, you've got Penn State-Syracuse. The Nittany Lions, a surprising 8-4 last season. The 'Cuse came on strong late in the season to finish at 8-5. But of course, Syracuse going to have to replace its head coach Doug Marrone and quarterback Ryan Nassib. Marrone on to the Buffalo Bills, and Nassib now a member of the New York Giants. They will do so with Coach Scott Schaefer, who was the defensive coordinator at Syracuse last season. So he, of course, knows the program. And they've got 4 quarterbacks competing to replace the best Syracuse quarterback we've seen in Nassib since Donovan McNabb in the late 90s. All right, Penn State, Bill O'Brien, you know this guy can coach. When he turned that offense, and we've seen it in recent years, into the #1 passing offense in the Big Ten. But he loses Matt McGloin, and we've got some replacements here to talk about in junior college transfer Tyler Ferguson, and also the #1 recruit, the guy that Penn State fans want to see on the field, Christian Hackenberg, the #1 or 2 rated quarterback, depending on your service, coming out of high school, Christian Hackenberg. Penn State-Syracuse, great early season matchup in the Big Ten. Penn State at 8-4 last season. That's in week 1. The next week, you've got Illinois at 2-10 taking on Cincinnati, 10-3 in 2012, co-champion of the Big East. Illinois 0-8 in Tim Beckman's first season at Illinois. Now they lose 5 assistants during this offseason, so more transition for these Illinois players to have to take on this season. For Cincinnati, they're led by quarterback Munchie Legault, and they bring back the entire offensive line, so we expect Cincinnati to vie again, possibly for a Big East championship. September 7th, Illinois taking on Cincinnati. Cincinnati makes its way into our conference matchups, non-conference matchups, again here, taking on Purdue. So it's Purdue in week 1 at Cincinnati. The Boilermakers at 6-7 last season, following that demolition at the hands of Oklahoma State in its bowl game. But they bring in head coach Daryl Hazel, coming in from Kent State, where he did a phenomenal job. Of course, came within an overtime of making a BCS appearance. And for Cincinnati, they're led on defense by linebacker Greg Blair, who led the Big East in tackles at 138. For Purdue, they lose both of its quarterbacks. Turbush and Marv have graduated. Rob Henry's got some experience there, but they also have 3 freshmen coming in to compete. Marshall, Etling, and Appleby. 3 freshmen competing for the Purdue starting quarterback job. Could be a rough season for the Boilers coming in, again, at 6-7. Last season, they lose their best defensive player, maybe the best in the Big Ten, in Kawan Short. And really, for the first time in years, Purdue does not bring speed on the edge at outside linebacker and defensive end. They're really void of playmakers on defense. Again, Daryl Hazel could have a tough time at West Lafayette in year 1. All right, we've got Indiana taking on Navy. The Hoosiers much improved at 2-6 in the Big Ten under head coach Kevin Wilson. Last season, 4-8 overall. Their big non-conference game, we've got slated against Navy. That on September 7th. Navy 8-5 following a blowout loss to Arizona State in postseason play. You've got a number of quarterback candidates for Indiana and Trey Roberson, Cameron Kaufman, who threw 15 TDs last season against 11 picks, and also Nate Sudfeld, 7 touchdowns, 1 pick for Indiana last season. So Kevin Wilson knows how to run an offense. We saw that at Oklahoma. He's doing some things with that Indiana offense, and they gave some scares to some teams like Michigan State and Ohio State last season. So again, September 7th, big Indiana game against Navy. That's the best as it gets for Indiana in the non-conference competition this season. All right, Michigan-Notre Dame, of course, this is a rivalry that's going to be discontinued for a number of years. So you need to catch this one. September 7th, Michigan at 8-5, but certainly the best 5-loss team in college football last season, taking on Notre Dame. Michigan really clamped down the Notre Dame offense at South Bend, losing 13-6. It was Denard Robinson's 5 picks that did in the Wolverines last season. You've got quarterback Devin Gardner, a guy that I thought should have taken over the offense much earlier in the season. Denard Robinson should not have been taking snaps with that type of offense at Michigan. Fitz Toussaint, Michigan fans will be happy to see him back in the lineup after injuries knocked him out late last season. Again, it's September 7th. Huge game in the Big Ten in terms of trying to get some of that luster back. Michigan against Notre Dame. You also have Michigan State taking on Notre Dame. Of course, Notre Dame taking on the trifecta in the Big Ten as usual. Michigan, Michigan State, and Purdue. We're going to mark off that Purdue-Notre Dame game as possibly, most probably, a loss for Purdue. So we look at Michigan State-Notre Dame on September 21st. That game's going to be at South Bend. Of course, offense is needed desperately in East Lansing. You've got quarterback Andrew Maxwell, who struggled mightily behind a poor offensive line and more drops than you would see out of any team last season at Michigan State. In particular, they need Aaron Burbidge to step up after 29 catches. He's a four-star recruit at Michigan State. And so it's Michigan State, their big non-conference showdown against Notre Dame. A couple great defenses coming back despite the losses to the NFL draft. Michigan State, Notre Dame. All right, on September 14th, I'm very interested to see Nebraska-UCLA. The Huskers went out to the West Coast last season and really got blitzed on defense, 36-30, but most notably over 700 yards of total offense by the Bruins with a freshman at quarterback, Brett Hundley. Nebraska has not had a very good defense since Ndamukong Suh left campus a few years ago. Abdullah back at the running back position, along with Taylor Martinez at quarterback, Kenny Bell at wide receiver. So weapons and speed and a doable scheme for Nebraska on offense. They will score tons of points, but the defense has got to improve at Nebraska for them to vie for a Big Ten championship. And of course, UCLA, a much improved football program under Jim Mora. Check out our UCLA Spring Football Post and Nebraska Spring Football Post to learn more about Nebraska and UCLA. September 14th, great matchup in Lincoln. All right, we've got Northwestern taking on Syracuse. These two teams matched up last season. Northwestern most likely had the best showing of all the Big Ten teams in non-conference play. They defeated Syracuse and Vanderbilt and Mississippi State in the bowl game. September 7th, this season, it's Northwestern taking on Syracuse and quarterback Kane Coulter. You've also got Trevor Siemian. So you've got a two-quarterback system at Northwestern, and head coach Pat Fitzgerald says we can win doing that. They certainly did it last year. They lost 3 games at the wire. Otherwise, they would have contended for a Big Ten championship. Certainly had a great season at 10-3. And of course, again, it's Syracuse back in the fray against Northwestern. So the Big Ten taking on Syracuse a lot with Penn State and Northwestern. And last season it was Minnesota as well. Week 1, we've got Iowa in a rematch against Northern Illinois. Northern Illinois making a BCS bowl game against Florida State last season. Its lone loss was 7-6 against Iowa. Iowa has to replace James Vandenberg at quarterback. They've got a number of candidates to do that. They return 9 starters from a pretty good defense and possibly the best linebacking core in the Big Ten at Iowa. Kirk Ferentz says, remember, we were down in 06 and 07. We bounced back with big bowl victories and big double-digit win seasons in 2008 and 2009. We'll see if he can do the same 5 years later. So on August 31st, Iowa takes on Northern Illinois, the big non-conference game for the Hawkeyes. And finally, it's Minnesota and San Jose State. And what a job Mike McIntyre did at San Jose State. They were a 1-10 football team, 1-12 football team, 2010. They upped that to 11-2 in a bowl victory last season. McIntyre takes the Colorado job. He's replaced there by Ron Carragher, who steps in after being an assistant, or actually an assistant earlier under McIntyre, went to San Diego State as the head coach. Now he comes back to San Jose State. They take on Minnesota. Minnesota never schedules out of conference, and much the same here against San Jose State being their biggest game. Back for Minnesota on offense, quarterback Philip Nelson, the sophomore, and running back Donnell Kirkwood. Minnesota trying to build off that impressive showing against Texas Tech in a loss in the bowl game, 34-31, a game that they had a 10-point lead very late in the game, blew it, fumbled, made some bad coaching decisions. So Minnesota at 2-6 in the Big Ten, their big non-conference game this fall against San Jose State. That's a look at the Big Ten. Big Ten fans, step up, talk to us about non-conference competition with your particular team taking on some of the best in college football. Right here on Mark Rogers TV.